about personality types, how it impacts your SLP career, and how you can have a better understanding of your personality type so that you can figure out what work habits work best for you, so that you can figure out what setting, what situation is ideal for you, or if you're in a setting that up until this point you felt like it wasn't ideal for you, how to make the most of that situation based on your strengths. So I am going to be sharing my screen today. The way that Facebook Live works is that I'm not going to be able to toggle back and forth between my face on the screen and my screen that's shared. So I am going to be sharing my screen so that you can see my visuals this entire time today. These live sessions can go anywhere between 30 and 60 minutes. I have another call today at 9, so it will definitely be done by about 8:50 or so. But it really just depends on what I get into. Sometimes I might, if somebody pops in and has a question, then I may go off on a tangent to answer their question. But with that all being said, I am going to go ahead and get started. So what you see on the screen today is the DISC profile website. So I know with personality types, there is a debate with any type of profiling assessment. There's always the question of, is it valid? Is it reliable? And then there's also the debate of growth mindset versus fixed mindset and learning styles and all those kinds of things. So I wanted to start off by just a disclaimer about all of this information I am going to share with you. So first of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about learning styles. So obviously there has been research done on learning styles, and this is the, auditory, kinesthetic, all of those types of things. And learning styles as just something that we consider to be something you're born with, meaning that you have to learn auditorily, some people learn visually, etc., and that is the way that you have to learn. Obviously, certain people have different neurological profiles that might make it easier or harder for them to learn in certain ways if they have a certain disability. But when we apply the concept of learning styles to just everyone, regardless of their neurological profile, they have been debunked, meaning that there hasn't been a we can't necessarily prove that, and actually it's been disproven that we have to learn a certain way when it comes to learning style. There's actually a great TED Talk on it. I can share that later on in the comments. But we know that learning styles are not accurate, even though a lot of people teach in a way that where it's like, sometimes some districts are even required to put learning styles on IEPs and things like that. So we know that it's not necessarily true that you have to learn a certain way. Obviously, legitimate disabilities can have an impact on that, but we know, especially based on the research done by Carol Dweck, who wrote the book Mindset, where she compared fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, we know that it's not really learning styles, meaning that it's something that you're born with that you can't change. It's really more of the idea of that we know that being able to learn a certain way, when we apply the concept of a growth mindset, we know that we can actually change our skills and abilities if we work at them and if we make a conscious effort. So do certain people learn better from auditory versus visual? Of course, but it's not necessarily a learning style, it's more of a learning preference. And while genetics may play some part in that, we know that it might be environment also plays a huge role, meaning that for whatever reason, you may have been exposed to a certain stimulus, you may have been developed certain habits over time that has made you develop certain abilities. So for example, if you have spent a lot of time listening to things and developing those auditory skills, we know that you might be better at learning that way simply because you've developed those habits. So it's really more like learning preferences rather than learning styles. With that being said, if you have developed a certain skill set or certain tendencies, sometimes it does make sense to just use the skills that you already have. It's kind of like, for example, let me think of an example here. Like, if I'm going to, for example, like, let's say that I want to get in a fitness routine or something like that. I have been a runner for years, and I've also been a swimmer since I was a child. It would make sense for me to pick some type of a skill that I already know how to do, because that would be easier for me because I've already developed those skills. The time that I would take to learn that would be a lot less than doing something totally different that I haven't developed. For example, like, I'm trying to think of a sport that I haven't really done, like windsurfing or something like that, that requires a lot of other skills that I haven't developed yet, or soccer, or whatever it is. It would make sense for me to use those skills that I already have because it's more efficient. So a lot of times when we're thinking about this, we want to just be aware of our unique tendencies, and really the whole learning style debate and personality profile debate. The thing is that we know that people are different. We know that they have different habits, and whether it's a learning style thing that we're born with, whether it's something that is simply a habit we've developed over time, is kind of besides the point. We all know that we're different and we have different tendencies. So with that all being said, I wanted to just have that discussion before I dive into the personality profiles, because I know that one of the questions that a lot of us have in the field is the whole concept of certain personality types complete BS, or is it legit? Well, we know it's legit. We know that people have different tendencies. Whether or not you can change your tendencies, obviously there is some room for that. And I'm sure, I'm convinced that because some people are so different, genetics and environment does play a factor, and there probably is only so much that you can do. And it does make sense to leverage those tendencies that we have. So with that being said, the two that I'm going to talk about today, as we actually get into specific personality types and tendencies and the strengths and setbacks to all of them, I'm going to be talking about the DISC profile today. So this is one of the common profiles that are used for people who hire. I have actually, this from the specific company where I hired my virtual assistants for my company. A lot of the people who put their online job profiles on that site will put their DISC profile on there. So I was able to see that when I was looking for people who I wanted to work for me for my business. I know other SLPs who use this for even in the clinical setting. And it is what it stands for. Again, it's an acronym that stands for dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. So those are the 4 areas and the 4 tendencies in the DISC profile. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to go through and talk about all those different tendencies. And you can actually, I am going to share, and I'll show you the website and bring it up on the screen. This page that I have is if you actually want to purchase the full DISC profile, but there's actually a free assessment that you can take. It doesn't give you as in-depth of an assessment as the purchased version, but if you want to just test it out and see how you like it, it is available. And it's actually on the Tony Robbins website. And what it does is that you sign up, you take the test, you sign up, you enter your email address, you're on their mailing list, and they will send you emails about promotions and offerings and things like that. But once you take the free one, they'll tell you what your DISC profile is based on what type you are, and it'll give you a brief description of that. And if you want some more detailed information and a more detailed profile, there is one that you can pay for if you want it. So I will be sharing that with you, the free disc profile that you can take, just so you can get a taste of what that is like. So I am going to go through and talk about all the different sections of the disc and talk about how that might apply to your job as an SLP. So I'm going to start with dominance and then go through all of these here. I will say when you do the disc profile, it'll give you 2 of them. Usually 2 of these tendencies will stand out. So your profile is whichever ones are the highest. I do know people that are kind of equal across the board, but usually people will have at least 1, if not 2, that are kind of their primary traits, because a lot of them are kind of, I don't want to say they conflict with each other, but it's hard to be every single way. So I'm going to start with dominance here. So I'm going to go and click learn more in just a minute here. But people who are Ds, they place emphasis on accomplishing results. So they're really, really outcome oriented. So a lot of times people who are high Ds, they're not necessarily concerned with the road to getting there and the systems that you use to get there, depending on what other types they are. But they're really just focused on what's the bottom line, what's the end result. So a lot of times because of that, because they're kind of like, all right, where are we going? What's the point? They are, again, very direct, can come off as very blunt. And they often are people who really thrive in leadership roles, because a lot of times, because they're kind of big picture thinkers rather than really detail oriented, they tend to naturally have that bird's eye view of how everything looks. Like, for example, if you're trying to put some initiative in place for your building, for your organization, a lot of times what they're able to do is kind of, again, have the bird's eye view of what everybody's purpose is on that team. And yes, in order to actually implement that, a lot of times there need to be people working under somebody or working with somebody who is a high D, because there are many times you need the big picture, but then in order to get things done, you need to be task oriented and you need to dive deep into little specific areas. So for example, let's say that you had a school administrator who had a big vision of where they wanted to go with their special education services or their curriculum. And then there are a lot of teachers and staff who have to do certain specific behaviors on a day-to-day basis, on an hour-to-hour basis during every day, that would actually get that big initiative done. So what the D would be able to do is figure out how to see the big picture of where are we going, and then everybody else that's working with them would be kind of diving deep. So for example, if you were the SLP in that area, then what you'd be able to do is, okay, based on this person's big vision of where we're going, what do I need to be doing in my individual session? So you'd be the one that's kind of diving deep into those specific areas. I'm going to click on D and go into this one a little bit more. So I like to mention this one because I have worked with school administrators who have been high Ds, and understanding what motivates them has been really key in me understanding what motivates myself, because I actually am a D, but also being able to work with other people. So for example, I had a principal who I worked with who was a D, and he was very much a get it done kind of a guy. He liked to, his meeting agendas were always really quick and to the point. He didn't like to ramble on and have long, drawn out emotional conversations. And so whenever I needed to go to him with some type of initiative, I knew that I had to have all of the steps in place, and what he wanted to see was what's the end goal and how is this going to make things better for the students and how is it going to make my life easier? Not that, not that he was being selfish or anything like that, but the way that I had to present things was he needed to see what the big picture end goal was. And in order for him to agree to it, I couldn't necessarily require him to get too caught up in the details, because that was not something that he liked to do. It wasn't something that that came natural to him, and it caused extra work for him. So it would make his job harder. So for example, when I wanted to test 3-to-1 model, I had everything laid out, and all I did was, went in and explained to him what I was doing, how I was going to do it, what I needed from him, which really wasn't much, just his support in the matter, and if anybody had any questions. And basically, since I had done all of that kind of task-oriented grunt work, it was like, here it is, it's done, this is what I'm doing, do you agree? And it made it easier for him because he knew that I was doing something that would help students. I could clearly explain to him the outcome and the end result, which was that I would have a better understanding of what was going on in the classrooms. I'd be able to consult. All the details were taken care of. He didn't have to do anything. All he needed to know was that it was happening. So because of that, it was easy for him to say yes to me because I made it easy for him based on his personality. Now, that is people who are in leadership roles tend, if you are a D, a lot of times being a supervisor who kind of oversees things is a really good role for you. There are people who are high Ds that are good clinicians as well. They just have to, again, you have to just figure out how to motivate yourself. So that means that maybe you are, if you are in a position where you're working as a team, you might be drawn more towards the big picture ideas, and maybe you work collaboratively with other people who might take some of that detail-oriented work off your plate. And, sometimes when you are working as a team, and for example, like I worked as a team with 3 other SLPs when I was in the schools. And so sometimes we'd be like, hey, do we want to try XYZ? So sometimes, if I was a D, I could come and be like, hey, do we want to try this program, or do we want to try this initiative? We did a lot of different things, like, for example, we would do phonological awareness intervention in classrooms or something like that. And so if I knew I was a D, then I might start off by kind of the big picture. What's the end goal? What outcomes are we wanting to achieve? And then maybe as we divvied up all the different responsibilities of what somebody else was going to do, maybe I would let some of the other people who were maybe a little more task oriented do some of those more detail oriented tasks. With that being said, obviously, if you have a job, there are certain things you might have to do that might go against your tendency. The way that I managed that when I was in the schools is, number one, I am going to get to my other tendency, which is C. So because of my other tendency, I actually had the ability to be big picture and process oriented at the same time. So I was still able to do the job fairly well. But I knew that if I spent too much time in the grunt work, that I would get really burnt out and frustrated. So what I would do is that I would do my work in big blocks, where it was like, okay, this is my task-oriented time when I'm going to be, creating systems and processes of, what my lesson plans are and things like that. And then I would make sure that I did big chunks of that, and then I would switch gears and give myself some time for the big picture thinking, so that I knew that I felt good about what I was doing. And because of that, it allowed me to still feel good about what I was doing and not burn myself out. Because what happens is that you can improve your ability to be more process oriented if you are a D, but at the same time, you don't want to be, it is easy to get burnt out if you are in a situation where you are doing something that's not against your natural tendency. I will say I have had people that I've worked with who have been high Ds that have struggled with this right here. For example, very sensitive IEP meetings. Obviously, it's great to keep to your agenda and figure out like what's the end goal here, but there are times when you do need to be patient. You do need to allow people to talk and figure out the details of how you're going to implement something. And I know I've been in situations in the past where parents have been wanting to talk about something sensitive for their child, or maybe they've had some questions about the implementation. And I have had administrators who are kind of, the parents ended up feeling kind of brushed off. So if you are a D, I think know that you are somebody who can really do well with being a leader, starting a business. These people tend to be really good at sales and marketing, but know that it is important to kind of slow down for people who are a little bit more emotional, detail-oriented, and in sensitive situations. All right, so I'm going to move on to the I. So people who are I are people who do tend to be more focused on building relationships, connecting with people who are very, I would say someone who's a people person tends to be an high I. So I think we do get a lot of people who are SLPs who are Is. I will say, though, I know that there are a lot of people who aren't high Is who do tend to feel a little bit burnt out when they have to be really in this deep connection, because when you think about what you have to do when you're doing therapy, you are really connecting with other people all day. There's a lot of collaboration. There's that really, deep connection with other people. And so sometimes if you aren't a high I, which I am not, sometimes those types of things can really use a lot of your energy. Now, I will say that I learned to be more, to do those situations and to be in those situations, but I definitely needed my time to recharge and my time to focus on big picture things, because that was what really recharged me. So let me go into the I. So obviously, these types of people do, if they do want to be a leader, if they want to start a business, especially if they do want to be a clinician and work as a team. Obviously, this type of personality is really good for those types of things where it involves connecting with other people. So if you are in a situation where you've got a team of people and you have a very sensitive situation, if you're an I, you'd probably be a really good person to deal with that type of thing, because they tend to be very good at that connection. A lot of times when we are in those challenging clinical situations, yes, we need to understand the end outcome. We need to be detail-oriented and understand our process. But what can be equally and sometimes even more important is the connection with the patient or our clients. There's a lot of research that shows that the relationship with the therapist and the way that the patient feels about the clinician that they're working with can be it can have a huge influence on the outcomes. And if there is not that connection, if there's actually a detriment, even if that person might technically be a good therapist. So this is really important. And if you are in a situation, for example, if you're wanting to start a private practice or a business, any of those things, again, whether it be your marketing strategy, whether it be the type of business that you pick, People who are high I's, you want it to be focused on connection with other people. So for example, if you are running a private practice and you're providing therapy all day long and doing evaluations and consulting with patients, this is going to be a really good fit for you if those are some of those things that really thrive and really help you connect, allow you to connect with other people. Now, I will say that sometimes people who are high I and low D sometimes struggle with the marketing and sales. So they're connecting with people. And I say marketing and sales, this isn't just if you're running a business, but also just, for example, if you are in a school and you're convincing a parent that their child needs special ed services. We all have a marketing and sales role, even if we're not running a business. So sometimes these types of people can be really good with that collaboration, but when it comes to being assertive, they might struggle a little bit because they do sometimes. I know people who are really focused on service sometimes have a hard time asking people for money or being very direct with them about, okay, this is what you need to do, and maybe in setting those boundaries because they're afraid, because they're concerned about those relationships. They're worried that if they're assertive, that it's going to be construed as negatively, or that they're worried about being pushy. So if you are this type of person, you want to just make sure that you don't let people walk on you, that you do set those boundaries, and that you do learn how to be direct with people. But know that you can make a big impact on what people do by just connecting with them. So that's going to be where your strength is. A lot of times people who are high I's and are low in some of the areas like S and C tend to struggle with being detail oriented. I have an administrator that I worked with who was, he's a superintendent now, and he was just, like when he was a teacher, all of the kids just like everybody wanted to be in his class. And he was just very charismatic. Everybody loved him. But when it came to just like scheduling and logistics, he really struggled. So what he actually did was, again, now that he's in a leadership role, he's got a really good administrative assistant that works under him. He's got some some principals that work under him or that work with him that, for example, the administrator that I talked about before that was a high D is also, I'm not sure what else he is. I would say he might be D, like a DC or a DS, but he's a good implementer. Even though sometimes high Ds tend to be not detail oriented, he's detail oriented when he knows that it ties to the outcome, which is how I am as well. But this other administrator who works under him that is is a D and is also good at implementing, helps that other administrator who's very high I and not detail oriented, because a superintendent can say, hey, I've got this initiative. This is what I want to do. I'm going to talk to the staff about it, get everybody on board. So he can use his high I to be persuasive and influence and connect with people. And then the other administrators can come in and figure out how to be task oriented to get it done. So if you are a high I and you struggle with being process oriented, it can be really good to team up with somebody who is, that can help you with that implementation, that can either do some of that for you while you do other things to contribute, or can kind of help structure you. So those are the first two. Then I want to move on to steadiness. Now, when I did the DISC profile just a month ago, I was CD. But when I did it before, I was SC. And I think it was because it was, I was just going through some stuff. I had just left the school for my business, and I was feeling very nervous about not knowing, not having that predictable salary like I did in the school. So I was feeling very risk averse at the time. So I think that's why my S came. out very high, but I think truly I'm more of a D. But let me go into steadiness. Now, I think a lot of SLPs are high S because, and especially a lot of the SLPs that I mentor are very high S because they, one of the things that people say to me is they're kind of like, I need a curriculum. I need this to be scripted. I need this to be more specific. And, I need to know step by step what to do in my sessions. And knowing all of that can be very can be good. And a lot of these SLPs are really want to have things mapped out before they walk into a session. So again, they kind of they don't like to be rushed. They've got they like things to be predictable. They like cooperation, and that they don't when there's cooperation, it means like everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. There's no conflict. Conflict can be unpredictable. So because the person who is a high S likes that predictability, they tend to like everybody to just be doing what they're supposed to be doing and not challenging things. So they're very good for any type of job. I had she was kind of she was a curriculum director / special ed liaison, and she was very good at she would look over our IEPs to make sure that we checked all the boxes and things like that. And she was very much like, let's make sure, let's uphold standards. Let's make sure everything's done right. And so she was very good at that type of thing. So people who are, showing, if you're responsible for, upholding guidelines, understanding legal mandates, which is something that we have to do a lot of the times when we are in a clinical role, those are very good roles for people who are high S. And again, like if you are in a situation where you've kind of got the same schedule, it's very stable, it's consistent. It is, again, like there's that stability there. That tends to be something where people who are high S tend to thrive. Now, where it gets a little bit tricky is that sometimes if people who are in S's tend to be, because they like things to be predictable, sometimes they can fear things to be unknown. And so where I've had to come in, because I'm more of a D, people who are Ds tend to be a little more big picture and tend to be more likely to challenge the status quo. So where I've come in to mentor people who are more who are higher on the S spectrum, I've sometimes felt like I've had to be really reassuring to them that it's, what, I can give you this, and this to plan for your sessions, but to be honest, in therapy, it's great to have all of those things be organized and laid out really well. But at the same time, there are certain things that you've got to get comfortable with being a little unpredictable. Therapy's unpredictable. You can plan out your scaffolding techniques all day long, but you just never know how a client's going to respond to it until you actually get in there with the client. Same thing if you are, again, like when you get a new evaluation, you can have your evaluation process down, and that can work really well. But at the same time, you just don't know how that person coming in for the evaluation is going to respond because they're a human being. So that can be, new people, like new evals, can be a little stressful if you're somebody who is an S. Now, while if you have a job, again, therapy can be kind of, you've got the same schedule day after day. That can be a really good situation for somebody who is an S. A lot of times people who are an S really like to have at least some of their salary to be really predictable because they do like that predictability. And then that stability. However, it doesn't mean that somebody who's an S can't be part of a business or a private practice. You just have to make sure that you have, you're kind of monitoring your risk tolerance. So for example, maybe if you are an S and you're wanting to start a private practice, you're wanting to start a teachers pay teachers store or create an online course like what I did, you might instead, like some people are comfortable just being like, I'm going to burn all boats and just go all in on this. If you're an S, maybe you're like, you know what, I want to start building this up on the side and gradually make this transition. So maybe you just, if you wanted to do something like that, you'd minimize your risk. Now, a lot of other people might say, you know what, I never really want to leave my secure therapy job here where I know exactly what I'm going to make, or I at least know what I'm going to make with this job. And maybe you have some other things on top of that. So that's just a personal choice. But in general, people who are high S tend to be a little more risk averse, which again, because they are risk averse, they tend to be really good at mitigating risk. So people who are in insurance and things like that, you figure out like, what's the worst thing that can happen and what steps do I need to take if that happens? So it can be really good for a person who is an S to be teamed up with somebody who's a D, who's kind of a driver, like let's keep moving, push the status quo. And then the S person can be the one that provides that structure. Or people who are high I and low on S tend to be a little more of the, what I have heard people say is kind of the delusionally optimistic. And that doesn't mean that you're delusional if you're an I, but I know some people who are kind of like eternal optimist and never think that anything is going to go wrong. And that's good to be aware of that, because that is something that can allow you to do things, that are pushing the status quo. But at the same time, it is good to have somebody that's kind of like, all right, wait a minute, let's just make sure that we're doing this safely, be kind of like, having a lawyer draw you up an agreement that's going to protect you and things like that. Or, making sure that you've got all your ducks in a row before you focus on those other big picture things. So if you are an S, then, again, something that is kind of steady and predictable might be something that would be the best situation for you. All right. So C is the other tendency. And because we're getting close to 9 o'clock here, I am going to wrap C up really quickly, and then I'll talk quickly about the 4 tendencies. So this is actually the other one that I am. Now, sometimes people, so I am a D, sometimes people who are high Ds tend to be really not strong at procedural things. They're very general. But the reason that I am able to do both is be process oriented and have kind of that, the driver type of personality, is because I also am high C. And somebody who is a high C is someone who really places emphasis on things being accurate and who wants the details. And also, I think part of me being a C is I want this big picture thing up here. I want to take some risks. I want things to be exciting. I don't want things to be, same thing every day over and over again. That makes me really burnt out and bored. Some people really like that, but it's not something that I like. But the way that I mitigate that risk and that anxiety is by the way that I am able to do that is that I am also very conscientious, and I am just very focused on I am focused on process as a matter of mitigating risk. So for example, I have to be very process oriented because I'm self-employed, and I have to know how to manage myself without somebody else telling me where I need to be at what time, like I did in the school. Now, of course, if you are in the school, you do have your schedule that you make, but as you know, when you're practicing, you do have to work around other people's schedules as well. So I'm going to pop into the C really quickly. this is so me right here. Fearing being wrong, maybe overcritical and overanalyzing and isolating themselves. That is totally me. I am always that person because I'm very analytical. I'm like, and again, we've been trained as SLPs to diagnose a problem. So I have that tendency to be like, hey, this is wrong and this is what we need to fix, rather than being like, these are the strengths, and focusing on that as well. So if you are a high C, you want to be aware that you are probably going to be really good at doing those evaluations because you're very conscientious, you're detail oriented, you're very good at being creating systems, and but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're not being too negative, especially when you're working with sensitive subjects. I know that when I did my first evaluation, when the first time I ever had to be the first one to tell a parent that their child had a disability, it was a little preschooler. He was 3, and I was just kind of like, he was low on this and he was low on this, and I didn't even notice that again, being a high D as well, being very blunt, I didn't notice that the parents were flinching every time I said the word delay. And the psychologist told me about it afterwards, and they were pretty upset. And I still think about that now as a something that was unfortunate that some other people had to suffer at my expense of learning that lesson. But again, I could have been more positive in the way that I was presenting that. Although sometimes when you are diagnosing, there's really only so much you can say. Sometimes you do have to be the bearer of bad news. But if I would have had some I tendencies, that would have probably helped. So I do want to point this out as well, because it is possible to be process oriented, and also where like an S is more likely to try to maintain the status quo. If you're a C, you tend to be more challenging assumptions. So I was always, when I was in the schools, really always trying new things with my schedule, coming up with new initiatives, and implementing them, because I liked to see I liked to poke holes in things to see what could be done to make things better. And people who are C's tend to be very kind of lifelong learner types, and tend to be people who like to be seen as content area experts, or just enjoy being content area experts. So this is again the final tendency on the DISC. So what you can do if you want to take this assessment is to go to this website here. I can actually pop this in the, let me see, in the comments right here. This is the free version of the DISC, and this is going to just be something that's going to explain what you are and what your strengths might be. So really the takeaway here is that there are all types of SLPs. There are all types of settings. The main thing is that you want to be aware of how to use your strengths regardless of what setting you're in. And then if you're considering, what's next for me in my career, you want to be aware of this. So if you are a high D, you probably will be a good person that could do some kind of a business, be in a leadership role. If you are an I, obviously the ability to connect can be a huge asset regardless of where you are. But if you are low S and high I, it is possible to be both, be high S and I. But if you're high I and low S, you do want to make sure that you are paired up with somebody who is good at being conscientious, and that you are not in a position that requires you to sit behind a desk all day and look through contracts or whatever it is. You're not stuck behind your desk doing paperwork, and then just figure out how to have more people time. And then obviously if you are high S, then that tends to be something that where you might like some more structure and predictability. So you can do something, like start a business and things like that, but know that you've got to have what can be really beneficial for you if you are an S is to have I or D in addition to S, because that's what's going to help you to be kind of a driver, or to at least have those people skills that's going to help you connect. And then obviously C, this again, depending on what it's paired with, if you are somebody who wants to be seen as an expert, that can be a huge asset to you. And again, you just have to kind of figure out how to pair it with the other strength that you have. With that all being said, again, the main takeaway here is figure out what your strengths are, figure out how to do more of what you're good at, and minimize the things that you don't enjoy, and pick a role that falls in line with your strengths. I am going to share this one. I didn't really have much time to talk about Gretchen Rubin's 4 tendencies, but this one's kind of fun as well. I think that this aligns really well with the DISC profile. The thing that I noticed is that I am a questioner on Gretchen Rubin's quiz. I think, let me see if I can find, here's where the quiz is right here, but there's upholders who are kind of maintain the status quo, like to uphold the rules. Those people probably tend to be like a high S. Questioners, I'm a questioner, and so because I'm how it works is like how it manifests for me is that I can be process oriented if the process matches up to the outcome. So the process oriented abilities for me is because I'm a C, but the fact that I will totally disregard the process if I don't think it's going to get me the outcome. And for example, there were some times when I was in the schools and I was like, that's not the law. You can't make me do it. And it's going to take up more of my time and not help anybody. So I'm not doing that, even though you said I should, kind of a thing. I did that a couple times with administrators. Obviously, I didn't want to be, I didn't want to get in trouble, but there were certain times where I was like, I don't really have to do that. So even though I can be process oriented, I don't think that process is important. So questioners are people who, when they buy into something, they're all in, but they have to be the ones to decide to buy into it. If it doesn't make sense to them, they're like, no, this doesn't make sense. So they'll follow the rules that they think apply. Obligers are the ones who, again, a lot of times these people are high I, and they are, again, people person. They like to kind of maintain the status quo, and they don't like conflict. So that's why they tend to be I's. And then rebels are people who just want to do things their own way. I have I like to do things my own way, but I will follow what somebody else says if it makes sense to me. Rebels are kind of like, they just don't like rules in general, and they are kind of like, they just kind of break the rules just because they can. They don't like that structure. A lot of times rebels are high D. So again, with all of these things, you kind of just have to figure out what's my tendency and how do I use that to my abilities, and how do I understand the strengths and weaknesses behind that tendency. So because we are at 8:50 right now, I am going to wrap up, but I'd love any questions you have about your personality type. Let me just share this other website in the comments as well. And then what I will also do is, I can find the, I will share later the TED Talk on learning styles so that you can dive into that as well. So thanks so much, everybody, for watching, and let me know what questions you have. Everybody have a great morning.